Just hours after being thrown onto the freezing streets of Seattle, an 18-year-old boy with nothing to his name inherited a rotting building in a dying town. Everyone told him to sell it for scraps. If he had, the town's darkest, century-old secret would have stayed buried forever. Leo Caldwell's breath plumed in the freezing air of his 1998 Honda Civic. It was his 18th birthday, a milestone usually celebrated with cake and family. For Leo, it meant aging out of the state's foster care system and finding his meager belongings packed in garbage bags on the porch of his final group home. He had exactly $42 to his name, half a tank of gas, and nowhere to go. The sharp rapping on his car window startled him awake. It wasn't the police, as he had feared, but a man in a surprisingly sharp grey suit holding a leather briefcase. The man introduced himself as Thomas Abernathy, a probate attorney who had spent the last 3 weeks tracking Leo down through a labyrinth of social services records. Sitting in a sterile, fluorescent-lit diner an hour later, Leo cradled a mug of black coffee to warm his numb hands, while Abernathy slid a manila folder across the table. "Your great-uncle, Silas Caldwell, passed away 2 months ago," Abernathy said, his voice completely devoid of emotion. "He had no immediate family. He was estranged from your father long before you were born. By default of bloodline, you are his sole heir." Leo stared at the folder. He didn't even know he had a great-uncle. "Heir to what?" Leo asked, his voice cracking from disuse and the lingering cold. "A house." "A commercial property," Abernathy corrected, tapping a manicured finger against the paperwork. "Caldwell's Provisions. It's a general store in Oak Haven, Oregon. The property is fully paid off. No mortgage. The taxes, miraculously, are current for the year. It is yours, Mr. Caldwell. Sign here, and the keys are yours." Leo signed. He didn't read the fine print. He didn't care. It was a roof. It was a place that belonged to him. The drive to Oak Haven took 6 hours, taking Leo deep into the damp, shadowed valleys of the Pacific Northwest. Oak Haven was a ghost of a logging town. The main drag, Elm Street, was a depressing lineup of faded brick facades, closed-down diners, and cracked sidewalks. At the very end of the street, sitting like a rotting tooth in the town's jawline, was Caldwell's Provisions. Leo parked his sputtering Civic at the curb and killed the engine. The sight of his inheritance made his heart sink into his empty stomach. The 2-story wooden building sagged violently to the left. The front windows were heavily boarded up with warped plywood, and the faded painted sign above the door was peeling away in thick, miserable flakes. The front porch was overwhelmed by aggressive, thorny blackberries that seemed to be actively swallowing the structure. Stepping out into the persistent drizzle, Leo pulled the heavy brass key Abernathy had given him from his pocket. He had to kick the front door twice, splintering the bottom frame, just to force it open over the warped floorboards. The smell hit him instantly, a suffocating wave of black mold, decades of dust, and the sharp tang of rat droppings. He flicked the light switch on the wall. Nothing happened. Pulling out his phone, he used the weak flashlight to sweep the interior. It was an absolute disaster. Aisles of heavy wooden shelving were packed to the ceiling with worthless, expired inventory. There were cans of soup from the late 90s, towers of yellowed newspapers, rusty hardware, and piles of rotting fabrics. It wasn't just a store. It was the lair of a hoarder. "Should have brought a match," a voice drawled from the doorway. Leo spun around. Standing on the rotting threshold was a man who looked entirely out of place in Oak Haven. He wore a tailored navy blazer, expensive Italian leather boots, and a heavy gold watch that caught the grey afternoon light. "I'm Bradley Carmichael," the man said, stepping inside but keeping a disgusted distance from the dusty counters. "I own Carmichael Development. You must be the long-lost Caldwell boy. Word travels fast around here." "Can I help you?" Leo asked defensively, slipping his phone into his pocket. Carmichael offered a tight, patronizing smile. "Actually, I can help you. I made your crazy uncle an offer on this pathetic excuse for a building a dozen times before he croaked. He was a stubborn old fool. But you? You're a kid. You look like you haven't had a hot meal in a week. I'm buying up this block to bulldoze it. I'm bringing a luxury boutique hotel to Oakhaven, capitalizing on the new state highway being built 5 miles west of here." Carmichael pulled a crisp, folded document from his inner pocket. $10,000. Cash. I'll take this hazard off your hands today. You can drive back to wherever you came from and start fresh. $10,000. To an 18-year-old kid who had just slept in a freezing car, it sounded like a fortune. It was a lifeline. Leo looked at the moldy walls, the collapsed ceiling tiles, the absolute hopelessness of the space. He desperately wanted to say yes. "I literally just got here," Leo said, his voice trembling slightly. "I need a minute to think." Carmichael's smile vanished, replaced by a cold, hard stare. "Don't play real estate tycoon with me, kid. This place is scheduled for a city health inspection next Tuesday. When the mayor sees this, he'll condemn the building. The city will seize it, and you'll get absolutely nothing. You have 48 hours to sign this." Carmichael tossed the contract onto an old barrel near the door and walked out, his expensive boots crunching on the broken glass outside. Leo stood alone in the dark, the silence of the rotting store pressing down on him. He walked over to the barrel, picked up the contract, and stared at the numbers. He was homeless, starving, and out of his depth. But as he looked around the ruins of his family's legacy, a strange, stubborn anger began to bloom in his chest. He was tired of being discarded. He wasn't going to sell. Not yet. The first night in Caldwell's Provisions was a waking nightmare. Leo dragged an old, surprisingly clean canvas tarp over the least rotten section of the floor behind the main counter and tried to sleep. The building groaned constantly, the wind howling through the cracks in the siding like a choir of grieving ghosts. Worse than the cold were the noises, scurrying sounds in the walls, the rhythmic drip, drip, drip of water leaking from the second floor, and occasionally a strange, deep thrumming sound that seemed to vibrate up through the floorboards. A heavy, metallic, settling sound that made no sense for a wooden building. By sunrise, Leo was exhausted, his bones aching from the hard floor. He ventured out to his car, grabbed a half-empty bottle of water and a stale granola bar, and began the impossible task of assessing his property. Around 10 in the morning, the front door creaked open again. Leo braced himself for Carmichael's return, but instead, a stout woman in her late 60s waddled in. She carried a steaming thermos and a white paper bag that radiated the heavenly scent of bacon and eggs. "Don't shoot, I come bearing breakfast," she announced, her voice booming through the empty store. "I'm Clara Higgins. I run the bakery across the street. Saw your car. Figured you were Silas's boy." Leo approached hesitantly, his stomach aggressively growling. Clara handed him the food and poured a cup of black coffee from the thermos. "Thank you," Leo muttered, practically inhaling the sandwich. "Slow down, child," Clara said gently, though her eyes darted nervously around the cluttered store. "Your Uncle Silas was a complicated man. Mostly people called him crazy. He used to stand on the porch and scream at Mayor Bennett and Bradley Carmichael whenever they walked by. Carmichael wants to buy this place," Leo said between bites. "He threatened me with a health inspection." Clara scoffed, crossing her arms. "Of course he did. Carmichael and the mayor are in each other's pockets. They'd been trying to get this specific corner lot for 5 years. Silas swore he'd die before he let them have it. He used to ramble about how Carmichael's grandfather stole this town blind, and how the proof was in the roots. We all thought it was dementia. She patted Leo's shoulder. Eat up. If you need a warm shower, come over to the bakery. Don't let Carmichael bully you, but be careful, Leo. This building isn't safe. After Clara left, Leo felt a renewed surge of energy. The proof was in the roots. It was likely the rambling of a sick old man, but it gave Leo something to focus on besides his own misery. He decided to start clearing out the back office, a room completely blocked by a collapsed wall of heavy metal shelving holding hundreds of rusted coffee tins. For hours, Leo hauled the heavy, filthy tins out to the back alley. His hands were blistered, his clothes covered in a thick layer of black grime. By late afternoon, he finally managed to push the heavy steel shelving unit away from the back wall. As the shelf scraped loudly across the floor, Leo froze. The wood paneling behind the shelf was different. The rest of the store was built from wide, rough-hewn oak planks, but a section of the wall behind the shelf, about the size of a standard door, was covered in tightly fitted vertical beadboard. Curiosity overriding his exhaustion, Leo grabbed a rusted crowbar he'd found near the register. He jammed the iron tip into the seam of the beadboard and threw his weight into it. The wood groaned, then shrieked as century-old nails gave way. Leo ripped the panel away, coughing as a thick cloud of dust plumed into his face. He waved the dust away, shining his phone flashlight into the newly exposed gap. It wasn't a wall. It was a heavy, reinforced iron door. It looked like something belonging on a bank vault, not a general store. The metal was dark and cold, secured by a massive, rusted combination wheel in the center. Leo reached out, wiping away a thick layer of cobwebs from the face of the dial. Beneath the grime, stamped into the iron, were the words, Oak Haven First National Reserve, 1894. What the? Leo whispered to himself. He pressed his ear against the cold iron. Nothing but silence. He tried to spin the dial, but it was completely seized by rust and time. Frustrated, Leo stepped back, his foot catching on something in the rubble of the torn wall. He looked down and saw a small, leather-bound book that had been wedged between the wooden panel and the iron door. The leather was flaking, the pages yellow and brittle. Leo picked it up and carefully opened the cover. The handwriting inside was erratic, written in frantic, heavily pressed pencil strokes. It was Silas's journal. The very first page had only one sentence written on it, underlined 3 times. They think they own Oak Haven, but I have the ledger, and I have the vault. Suddenly, the violent sound of shattering glass echoed from the front of the store. Someone had thrown a brick through the one remaining intact window. Leo shoved the journal into his jacket pocket, grabbed the crowbar, and sprinted toward the front of the shop. Standing on the sidewalk, surrounded by broken glass, was Mayor Harrison Bennett, flanked by a smug-looking Bradley Carmichael and a uniformed sheriff's deputy. "Leo Caldwell!" Mayor Bennett shouted through the broken window, his face red with manufactured outrage. "By order of the city, this building is officially condemned. You have exactly 1 hour to vacate the premises before Deputy Miller arrests you for trespassing on a municipal hazard." Leo gripped the crowbar, his heart hammering against his ribs. He looked at Carmichael, then back to the back room, where the iron vault sat, hidden in the dark. Silas hadn't just left him a rundown store, he had left him a weapon. Adrenaline flooded Leo's veins as he stared at the flashing red and blue lights reflecting off the wet, cracked pavement of Elm Street. Deputy Miller unclipped his heavy metal handcuffs, taking a threatening step onto the rotting front porch. Beside him, Bradley Carmichael wore a grin so smug it made Leo's empty stomach churn with rage. "Step aside, kid," Deputy Miller warned, his hand resting casually on his leather service belt. "The mayor gave the order. The building is condemned, and you're officially trespassing." Leo planted his boots firmly on the splintered floorboards, tightly gripping the rusted iron crowbar he had used to pry open the back wall. He had spent his entire life being shuffled from one abusive group home to another, evicted, displaced, and completely ignored by the world. He was tired of running. Before Leo could do something reckless that would inevitably land him in a county jail cell, the sharp screech of tires pierced the damp Oregon air. A sleek, black Lincoln town car abruptly parked aggressively parallel to the police cruiser. The heavy doors opened, and Thomas Abernathy, the probate attorney, emerged. He looked just as impeccably tailored as he had at the diner, though his usually stoic expression was now thunderous. He brandished a thick stack of legal documents, stamped with the official gold seal of the Oregon State Supreme Court. "Deputy Miller, I highly suggest you leave those cuffs on your belt, unless you want the State Attorney General investigating your precinct for civil rights violations by tomorrow morning." Abernathy's voice cut through the rain like a cracking whip. He marched up the decaying steps, physically placing his suited frame between Leo and the aggressive police officer. Mayor Harrison Bennett stepped forward, his face flushing a deep, angry purple. "Now, see here, Abernathy. This building is a verified structural hazard. As mayor, I have the executive municipal authority to condemn it to protect public safety." "You have the authority to initiate a city review," Abernathy corrected smoothly, shoving a court injunction directly into the mayor's chest. "But according to the State Heritage and Probate Code, my client is legally entitled to a mandatory 30-day grace period to address municipal code violations before any government seizure can occur." This emergency injunction was signed by Judge Peterson in Portland exactly 3 hours ago. If you or Mr. Carmichael set foot on this property before that grace period expires, you will both be arrested by state troopers for violating a federal probate mandate. Carmichael's smug, patronizing smile instantly evaporated. He snatched the thick paper from the mayor's hands, his eyes frantically scanning the dense legal jargon. "This is a pathetic stall tactic," Carmichael spat, glaring venomously at Leo. "You're delaying the inevitable, street rat. You have absolutely nothing. In 30 days, I'll drive the wrecking ball through this garbage heap myself." "We'll see you in 30 days, gentlemen," Abernathy replied coldly, gesturing toward the wet street. Reluctantly, the corrupt trio retreated. Their tires spun angrily on the wet asphalt, kicking up dirty rainwater as they sped away. Leo dropped the heavy crowbar, his hands shaking violently as the fight-or-flight adrenaline finally began to recede from his system. "I thought your job was officially done when I signed the transfer papers," Leo said, leaning heavily against the warped doorframe. Abernathy adjusted his silk tie. "Silas Caldwell paid my firm's retainer in advance. He paid for 10 years of uncompromising legal protection for his heir. He knew Carmichael would try to steal this land the moment he died. Now, you need to tell me exactly what you found back there." Leo led the attorney to the dark back room, shining his phone's weak flashlight onto the massive rusted iron door of the Oak Haven First National Reserve, 1894 vault. Abernathy's eyes widened dramatically, his strict professional composure cracking for the very first time. Pulling Silas's brittle, leather-bound journal from his jacket pocket, Leo opened it to the pages filled with frantic, heavily indented pencil scratches. Together, sitting on overturned wooden crates in the dusty gloom, they began to decipher the dead man's lifelong obsession. The journal detailed a massive, buried conspiracy that dated back to the Panic of 1893, a severe economic depression that had ravaged the United States. According to Silas's meticulous research, the town of Oakhaven hadn't naturally gone bankrupt. Josiah Carmichael, Bradley's great-grandfather and the town's founding industrialist, had systematically embezzled the town's entire wealth. Using a phantom Union Railroad company, Josiah had drained the local bank's gold reserves, successfully shifting the blame to the national financial crisis. With the town suddenly destitute and starving, Josiah bought up all the land deeds, including the highly coveted Elm Street commercial district, for pennies on the dollar, establishing the Carmichael family's iron grip on the region. But Silas's grandfather, Ezekiel Caldwell, had been the chief accounting clerk at the bank. He had discovered the massive fraud. Before the Pinkerton National Detective Agency could arrive from Chicago to investigate the missing municipal funds, Ezekiel managed to secure the last remaining shipment of gold and, more importantly, the master bank ledger that documented every single one of Josiah's illegal transfers. Knowing the local police were thoroughly paid off by the rich Carmichaels, Ezekiel sealed the damning evidence inside the walls of his general store. "The combination," Leo muttered, his eyes darting across a fragile page covered in numerical sequences. Silas wrote a specific sequence of dates. "Look right here. The founding, the panic, the theft." Leo rushed to the towering iron door. He wiped his sweaty palms on his jeans and grabbed the cold, heavy brass dial in the center. It protested with a horrific, screeching metallic grinding sound, but it moved. The founding. 1881. Leo spun the dial right to 18, left to 81. The panic. 1893. Right to 18, left to 93. The theft. 1896. Right to 18, left to 96. Leo held his breath, wrapping both hands around the massive iron lever. He planted his feet and pulled backward with all his remaining strength. A loud, echoing clack resonated from deep within the heavy iron door. The complex locking mechanisms, asleep for over a century, disengaged. With Abernathy stepping in to help, they hauled the incredibly heavy vault door open. Stale, dead air rushed out, carrying the distinct scent of dry, ancient paper and cold, hard metal. Abernathy aimed his tactical flashlight inside the dark cavern. Leo gasped. Stacked neatly against the back wall were dozens of heavy, rotting canvas bags, stamped with the faded black insignia of the Bancroft & Sons assay office. One of the bags had completely rotted away at the bottom seam, spilling dull, incredibly heavy bars directly onto the dusty floorboards. It was solid, gold bullion, its surface clouded by a century of dark tarnish, but unmistakably real. The sheer volume of wealth sitting in the dark was staggering to a boy who had counted his net worth in spare change just days prior. But resting on a small wooden pedestal in the very center of the vault was the true prize. A massive, leather-bound accounting ledger, perfectly preserved in the dry, airtight environment. Abernathy carefully stepped inside and opened the heavy ledger. His eyes scanned the pristine, handwritten ink columns. "My God," the lawyer whispered reverently. "It's all here. The fake shell companies, the documented bribes to the state legislature, the stolen property deeds. Leo, this ledger objectively proves that the Carmichael family's ownership of Oakhaven is entirely fraudulent. They don't legally own Elm Street. They never did." Leo looked from the fortune in gold to the fragile paper ledger. He wasn't just a discarded, homeless kid anymore. He literally held the key to destroying the corrupt empire that was actively strangling Oakhaven to death. "Call the state police," Leo said, a fierce, unstoppable fire igniting in his chest. "Not the local sheriff. Call the FBI if you have to. We're going to end this today." The following Tuesday evening was the annual Oakhaven Town Hall meeting, held in the drafty, echoing gymnasium of the local high school. The wooden bleachers were packed shoulder to shoulder with anxious residents. Wild rumors had been swirling all week about the aggressive standoff at Caldwell's Provisions, and the town was operating on a knife's edge of tension. Bradley Carmichael stood arrogantly at the wooden podium, flanked closely by Mayor Bennett. Carmichael was entirely in his element, projecting a glossy, high-definition architectural rendering of a massive, modern boutique hotel onto a projector screen behind him. "Progress requires sacrifice," Carmichael told the murmuring crowd, his voice oozing a sickly, faux sympathy. "Caldwell's Provisions is a rotting, dangerous eyesore, a literal symbol of our town's economic decay. Tomorrow morning, we will tear it down to the dirt, and from its ashes, we will construct a future that will bring immense wealth and tourism back to Oakhaven." A smattering of polite applause broke out, mostly originating from compromised city council members on Carmichael's heavy payroll. But Clara Higgins suddenly stood up from the front row, crossing her arms tightly over her chest. "You mean wealth strictly for you, Bradley. Your family has been squeezing this town dry for decades." "Sit down and remain quiet, Clara," Mayor Bennett barked aggressively into his microphone. "The demolition is entirely lawful and legally approved by this city. Actually, Mayor, the only thing happening tomorrow morning is a massive federal indictment." A loud, confident voice echoed from the back doors of the gymnasium. The massive crowd turned as one. Leo strode purposefully down the center aisle. He was no longer covered in toxic dust and grime. He wore a crisp, dark, tailored suit purchased courtesy of Thomas Abernathy, and carried a heavy, locked titanium briefcase. Abernathy walked closely behind him, alongside two stern-looking men in sharp suits who openly flashed gold badges, identifying themselves as elite investigators for the State Attorney General's Financial Crimes Division. Carmichael's face instantly drained of all color. "What is the absolute meaning of this disruption? Deputy Miller, remove this trespassing delinquent immediately." Deputy Miller eagerly took a step forward, but the heavily armed state investigators smoothly blocked his path, their hands resting on their weapons. Leo stepped up to the very base of the podium, staring directly into Carmichael's wide, panicked eyes. "You told me I had absolutely nothing, Mr. Carmichael. You were wrong. My great-uncle Silas wasn't crazy. He was a guardian, and he left me exactly what I needed to completely dismantle your life." Abernathy took the briefcase, clicked the twin locks open, and carefully extracted the century-old master ledger, holding it high in the air for the entire town to see. "This," Abernathy announced, his voice booming effortlessly through the dead-silent gymnasium, "is the original 1896 master ledger of the Oakhaven First National Reserve. For the past 48 hours, federal forensic accountants with the state of Oregon have been verifying its absolute authenticity. It definitively proves that Josiah Carmichael orchestrated the massive theft of municipal gold reserves, artificially bankrupting this town to seize your family's property deeds illegally." The gymnasium erupted into a chaotic, deafening murmur. Clara Higgins gasped loudly, her hands flying to cover her mouth in shock. "That is a fabricated forgery!" Carmichael shouted hysterically, slamming his fist down violently on the podium, his composed, wealthy facade entirely shattered. "A desperate, pathetic lie from a homeless street rat trying to extort me." The 200 pounds of gold bullion, stamped with the 1894 San Francisco Mint seal, currently sitting in a highly secured federal evidence locker in Portland, heavily dictates otherwise. The lead state investigator interjected calmly. He reached into his suit jacket and pulled out a stack of stamped warrants. "Bradley Carmichael, Harrison Bennett, you are both officially under arrest for criminal conspiracy, widespread extortion, and systemic historical real estate fraud. By immediate order of the State Supreme Court, all financial assets belonging to Carmichael Development are hereby completely frozen, pending a massive, multi-million-dollar restitution audit. Total pandemonium broke out. The residents of Oak Haven watched in stunned disbelief, their faces a complex mixture of shock and dawning, beautiful vindication, as the two most powerful, deeply corrupt men in their county were aggressively handcuffed and marched out of the gymnasium by state authorities. Decades of heavy intimidation and forced poverty literally walked out the door with them. Leo stood quietly in the center of the roaring chaos, a profound, heavy sense of peace washing over his tired soul, the crushing, daily weight of survival, the constant, gnawing fear of the freezing streets, the terrible feeling of being entirely invisible. It was all permanently gone. In the chaotic months that actively followed the arrests, Oak Haven underwent a miraculous, sweeping transformation. A federal judge formally ruled that the original property deeds violently seized by Josiah Carmichael were historically invalid. The massive tracts of land immediately reverted to a newly established municipal trust, which the town eagerly used to generously fund crumbling infrastructure, local public schools, and struggling small businesses. Bradley Carmichael's sprawling empire collapsed entirely overnight, his assets aggressively liquidated by the state to forcefully pay decades of massive back taxes and civilian restitution. As the sole, legally recognized heir to the Caldwell estate, Leo was legally awarded a highly significant portion of the recovered historical gold, a massive state finder's fee that instantly made him a multimillionaire at 19. But he absolutely refused to leave the recovering town for an easy life of isolated luxury. Oak Haven was the very first place on earth that had ever truly felt like home. Instead, Leo invested his newfound wealth directly back into the heart of Elm Street. He hired top-tier historical contractors to painstakingly restore Caldwell's provisions to its former glory. The rotting, dangerous wood was replaced, the violently sagging roof fortified with steel, and the depressing, boarded-up windows were transformed into gleaming, welcoming floor-to-ceiling glass. He grandly reopened the store, not as a dusty, forgotten relic, but as a modern, thriving community market and town museum. And sitting proudly in the back, serving as its historic, shining centerpiece, was the original, highly polished iron door of the Oak Haven First National Reserve. Leo Caldwell had arrived in Oak Haven with absolutely nothing but a plastic garbage bag and a broken-down car. He stubbornly stayed to become the respected architect of its great resurrection, definitively proving that the most valuable things in life aren't just handed down. They are fiercely uncovered, bravely defended, and generously shared. The truth hidden beneath Caldwell's provisions didn't just change Leo's life. It rewrote the history of an entire town, proving that sometimes the greatest treasures are buried where no one wants to look. If you were hooked by Leo's unbelievable journey from a homeless teen to a hometown hero, hit that like button, share this story with your friends, and subscribe to our channel for more incredible real-life dramas.